The 13-part video series on how to build the Smart Total Station, aka the Paulk Total Station 2, is up on YouTube for you to watch and follow along right now. Today's video, the 14th and final video in the series, is just to mop things up and answer a few questions. How to build it, it's already there, along with the plans. It should be no problem. I have had a lot of questions over the weeks and years that the bench has been up and available, and so many of you have built it and sent me pictures and glowing reviews about how it has helped you in your workflow, and I greatly appreciate that. So questions. I have a right and a left stop. I build two for the right and two for the left just because of my workflow, but that's up to you how many you build. The stops are right and left, but only in their assembly. All the parts and pieces are identical. It's just the flip stop is assembled to the left side for the right stop and to the right side for the left stop. Where you figure out what length your cut is going to be on the tape measure is taken not from the flip stop, not from this. It is taken from the body or the trolley. If we go with the flip stop as the measuring point, then we have no adjustability. The tape is fixed in place and the trolley is fixed. When I lock it on, say 400 millimeters, then that's what it's going to be, except we're actually making the cut off of the stop. So if we're off slightly, we can just loosen two nuts and move the stop in and out. And once we have it making that perfect cut, then there's a screw on the trolley, and that is simply there to move out or in just to the point where the flip stop will snugly rest against it. Because obviously if I'm moving this in and out, it's going to change its position to the trolley or the body of the flip stop. And what we don't want is when we are working away and not thinking, when we push a little too hard, we don't want to deflect the flip stop. So this gives us a very rigid stop when we lock it down between the spline that drops into the T-stop, that screw that keeps it from turning, so we get a really accurate stop. And that's important for our workflow because we want to set it, cut it, and know that it's right. We don't want to be double checking things with our tape measure. So the measuring point to the tape measure is on the body or the trolley, not on the flip stop. What do I do about shorter cuts? The tape stops at the saw. So there is somewhere between 10.5 inches, in my case more like 10 3/8, to the blade that the stop will not go to. So what do we do about that? Why don't I make a bigger stop that then has a flip stop that goes in up to the blade? There's a ton of reasons I don't do that. One is it makes for these really big clunky stops that I don't want to carry around. If I do that, then the zero mark is going to be way out here and I'm going to lose all of that space for actually cutting. So if I start my zero out here, I'm going to have to add about a foot to each side to get the same cut. So how do I deal with shorter cuts? A little story pole. This one happens to be 20 inches. I chose 20 because it's an easy number. If I need a 6-inch cut, I just simply set my trolley or my stop to 26 and I make the cut. I also have one set up for metric. I have it cut to 400 millimeter. So if I want to do a 100 millimeter cut, then I just set it to 500 millimeters and use my stick or my story pole. So it takes what could be a very complicated problem of making really long stops that might have a little more flex in, might not be as accurate, lose all that space, can be solved with this simple problem. And again, choosing the number is just a mathematical thing. What is easy? Why this size? Well, I have to defer to my 30 years of being a woodworker, finish carpenter, and home builder. I want the biggest bench possible. But the reality is I've got to move the bench not only to the job, I've got to fit it in a trailer or a truck or a van. I've got to physically pick it up and carry it. And I don't want to make that a two-man job. I want to be able to do it by myself. I started with a 4x8 bench, the very first Paulk workbench, and I still love that size, but it was too big. In my prototyping, I couldn't carry 4x8 practically. Not only the weight of it, but also getting it in a van or a truck. And then also when I'm on a job and I have to move my cutting station upstairs, a lot of times there's a turn in the stairs, it was just too big. So my solution was to split it into two 2-foot wide by 8-foot long pieces, and that worked really well. But over time, I realized that there's a certain amount of time that I was putting the bench together and then taking it apart. And again, not only to get it to the job and set it up, but oftentimes to be efficient, I just need to move from one room to another, from the garage to the kitchen, or from the downstairs to the upstairs, or from one bedroom to another, so that I can cut in place and move. So there's a lot of times that I just want to be able to move the bench around to be the most efficient. And I found that taking the two pieces apart just was one of those things that slowed me down. Now, I still like the larger bench. I still have the larger bench, but it becomes my third bench that I pull out when I really need the real estate. So I worked on what size bench is the perfect size bench. And I experimented and prototyped and played with and looked at assemblies, and I came up with 3 foot wide by 6 foot long. In that dimension, it was small enough that I could put it in my trailer or my truck very easily. I could carry it by myself easily, and I could take it up the tightest stairways by myself, even ones with a 180-degree turn, because the bench is small enough and light enough, I can tip it up on end and I can work it up the stairs real quickly. So that was making it big enough but still portable. Well, the big enough part comes in that, sure, bigger is better for assembly and things, but I found that 3x6 would cover almost all of these very little times that I have a task or project that I need something bigger. But I do have my 2-part bench when that comes up, so I can solve that problem if it arises. But most of the time, the 3x6 is large enough. Now, I went to metric. This is the total station is the only bench designed from the metric system ground up. And all of my benches going forward, when I modify them, will be brought into those dimensions. So it's actually slightly smaller than 3x6 because I did it a multiple of 96. And that was to do with the layout of the holes, the millimeter system, these 20 millimeter holes. So specifically, I started with 3x6 being the right perfect size, and then converting it to millimeter made it just a little bit smaller, but not much. In fact, I can tell you now, it's 34 inches and 71 3/4. So 2 inches narrower and about 1/4 inch shorter than 3x6. But again, that's based on the millimeter system. Now, another part of designing the width and length has to do with what this bench's purpose is. This is my total station. This is my bench for my tools. It's my miter stand. It is my router bench. It is my outfeed for my table saw, as well as assembly and working on the other side when I'm on jobs that this is my only bench. My go-to, my smart station is completed when I add the compact bench. So I have both almost all the time. 90% of the time I do both. This is my main bench. If I could only have one, I can do everything on this because I can assemble on this by simply removing the miter saw. There's no bolts or locks downs. That was really important that I do that. I didn't want to have to spend time bolting and locking the thing down. So I created this wedge system with the dado on the bottom, and I can just simply lift it and pull the wedge, lift it, and set it on the floor. And then I have a clear bench top to work on if I need it and I don't have the second bench. Another really big reason that my miter extensions have no back fence. A back fence doesn't add a single bit of accuracy or help you at all. It only gets in your way. The only back fence you need is on the miter stand. From there you can get all the accuracy in the cut you need, and then for the length you get it out of this, and that can be flush. So that's the reason for that. So it gives me a clear bench. I can set the miter saw on the stand underneath it and have it. But to be efficient, most of the time I have my tools set up on the total station, and I have the compact bench set up near it, and they can work together in tandem. I can have the table saw between the two. I can use the back bench to help support material as I'm feeding into the saw and out onto this bench. My workflow dictates how, these decisions that I made, and I absolutely have to have a table saw 100% of the time. But my big cuts, my wide cuts, are all done with a track saw. It's more accurate and it's faster. It's more efficient for me to move the saw across the material with a track, which is as accurate as any table saw, including a big slider. So I have basically a massive sliding table saw on the job wherever I go by simply putting my track on the compact bench. So it's really a system that has evolved and has just really been refined and refined and refined. One of the other issues that's very critical in setting how long I can cut on this, how long do the extensions need to be, how long does the bench need to be. There's one critical task that I do that takes a lot of time because it's probably the most repetitive job that I do when I am finishing a house, and that is cutting door legs. Door legs on interior doors, there's 4 for every single door. So if you set 20 doors, you've got 80 legs to cut. Well, for at least 20 years, 15 years at least, all of the houses that I do have 8-foot doors. 6'8" doors are very rare anymore. So if I'm called to hang 20, 30, 40 doors on a job, and I've got to case all of those, and they want them mitered, the miter is longer than the door. It adds whatever width of the molding is. If it's 4 inches wide, it adds 4 inches in the miter. So I need to go longer than 8 feet. So I set up the extensions so that the stops will go out to the length I need for that task. Now, I do crown molding and base molding, but those are never cut with stops. They're 16-foot goods that I lift up, and they're tape measure cut on the saw. There's just no reason, there's no repetitive nature to running crown molding or base molding to have to cut the same exact pieces over and over. So a stop doesn't help that much. So the length of having the extensions going both ways supports the 16-foot material and lets me pull my tape nice and straight. But having that repetitive cut for the door legs dictated how long the bench needed to be and how long the extensions needed to be. Because what I wanted to do is make it so that everything to do with the bench travels inside the bench. So if I went with a shorter bench, then the extensions would have to be longer, which means they wouldn't fit in the bench. Right now, the bench works perfectly with the extensions, and the extensions just fit. If they were any longer, they'd hang out on one end or the other or both. The sawhorses. There's a lot of great sawhorses on the market. Lightweight plastic ones that'll support 500 to 1,000 pounds. They're not that expensive. Why not just buy a set of those and save yourself the time of building these? There's not a single set of sawhorses on the market that I can buy that will support the long material when I'm cutting it. And with my workflow and efficiency, and I've done videos on this to show you how I work when I'm doing crown or base or cutting door legs, it is critical that the material be between me, the sawyer, and the saw. I need to be able to lift the material, put it on the saw. In the case of base or crown, pull the dimensions, make the cuts, put it back down, bring up the next piece. At the minute that the material is behind me or on the other side of the saw, now I am cutting, moving the cuts, either the finished cut that I want and maybe the fall off for a different cut to come somewhere else. And then I'm having to turn around and grab the material. Well, I need the material oriented on the bench a certain way, and if I mount it, if I have it so that I'll spin around with it, then I have to take a 16-foot piece of material. I've got to have room. I've got to spin it around. Or I have to have it oriented in the direction it goes in the saw, and then I have to lift it over my head and down. I've tried all of that. It really slows you down. You add 5-10 seconds to every cut, add more labor, it's far more efficient. So that's the reason for the sawhorses. These aren't that hard to make once you have the template made, and then you can make as many sets as you want. And again, I've done videos to show you how to do that. So take the time, make a template, and learn how to use the bushing on your router, and you can make them over and over again very quickly. I started with the big bench, and I had two pieces. It was the two-piece top, and then I had the two sawhorses, and then I had a spreader shelf on the bottom, and so I had 5 pieces. It assembled pretty quick, but it takes a little putting it together. It's a little bit like putting together a puzzle. I've been asked, why not make this bench out of cubes, 4 cubes or 2 cubes, and different parts and pieces? Same answer. This is simple. I have 1 bench and 2 sawhorses, 3 pieces. Most of the time, if I'm doing hardwood flooring install, if I'm doing cabinet install, so many things that I do in finished carpentry, I don't need the extensions. So I can quickly set 2 sawhorses and flip the bench up, and I'm ready to go to work. If I need to move to the next room, particularly doing hardwood, that's a time that I'll move the bench a lot, because it is way faster when I'm working down a hall and in a room to be closer to make my cuts. In fact, you'll see a lot of hardwood installers will use a miter saw on the floor and they'll drag it around. And I did that for years, but that doesn't work on my knees or my back, and I don't get as good of a cut as I do with this. So having the bench, I can move it around quickly. So breaking it up into pieces, it's a bit of origami. It's like putting a puzzle together every time you want to do it. It doesn't work for professionals. I think through everything to do with the bench and work possible, because I'm out there doing it. I've done it for a very long time. If I knew of a more efficient way, of an easier way, then I would build it. That's what I would have. I know of no more efficient system on the market than the total station, the smart total station, to have your tools set up and do 90% of what you need. And then when you need assembly and you need to break down plywood and do bigger stuff, then having a second bench to add to it. And if you're really tight on space and you can't have both benches, then going that extra step of just taking the miter saw off and having this full bench to work on as a bench without tools is also possible. There's always more questions to answer, but I assure you, if you are a working carpenter and you wonder why I did this or why I did that, just think about it critically. My goal is to be lean and efficient, to make my job easy, to make my job accurate, and make it so that I can go from one job to the other without a lot of fuss. If you decide to build yourself a total station, I hope this video series helps you and answers all of your questions. If you do like these videos, be sure to give me a thumbs up, subscribe, and remember to ring the bell so you'll know when I drop a new video. Thanks for dropping into the Smart Wood Shop. Stay safe and have a great day.